Hello everyone, welcome to the videos for this class. Again, I think I will be very short on the videos. There are only a few things that I want to explain, but it's mostly about starting writing the case study. And in the qualitative papers, which I think at this point are 5, um, the case study is essential, is the main thing. And for the quantitative paper, I think there is only one group doing quantitative, it's more like the description of the company and the description of the context, but I will explain that in a second. So I think I will talk more about the qualitative groups than the quantitative. So let me start with the presentation. So I want to tell you something about the structure of the case study, because the case study is it's a story, but it's a structure and theoretical story. Like if you tell me the story about what you did with a company or what happened with a company, but without a theoretical um, explanation, without theory, it doesn't make any sense. Like it's just a story. So these are tips that will help you to make your story or your case study more theoretical, because otherwise the reviewer will say this is something for a blog or for a newspaper, but not for a, and it's not going to improve the understanding or of anything. So be careful with that. Be careful on how you write your case study. So the structure is very important, because the structure of what you will write has to be based, and it's highlighted here in the second point. It has to be based on structure according to the framework that you are using. It comes to my mind the framework from Management Control Systems as a package from, I think it's group 2, the one that is doing this framework from Malmi and Brown 2008. You have to write the story uh, using the same structure as the framework. Like uh, you can start the introduction in one paragraph or maximum two about the context. I think you are using two companies, right? So maybe you can write two paragraphs about the context of these two companies, or maybe one about the two companies and one more about the COVID situation, because that's relevant for you. So one or two paragraphs maximum about the context. In here, you don't have to be that theoretical. It's just the context. So it's you are going to talk about is this company that has this many employees, and at the time at that time they didn't have any technological implications or any software, like in the example of group 1 with their company, who didn't have like a proper system or anything like that. You can note that, or you can state that in these two paragraphs. You can also talk about the COVID situation. And then from there, everything has to be very theoretical. Everything has to be coherent with the framework that you are using. Or if you are not using a framework, you have to be very coherent with the things that you want to highlight, like in group 1, when or where they are focusing on the problems that arose after the implementation. So talk about mm, let me try to be very clear. Like when you write your case, don't write it like first this happened and then this other thing happened. No, not like that. Write it in a sense that you can illustrate the thing that you wrote previously. Like if in the literature review you wrote that there are issues with the implementation of software in the way on which people use the software, well, that should be a section of the case study. Like start with the context and then talk about the first problems that arose. So you can write a subtitle saying like first problems of the implementation, for instance, and then you can write that in there. And we are not done with the data collection. So at this point, you can write, of course, I think the introduction, these two paragraphs about the context of the case study, I think you can write that. And you can start at least structuring the whole case. Like maybe you can again, if I go to the group number 6, when they have the framework about software implementation, I think you have very specific topics that you want to talk about. So your case should be structured in that sense. Like in the case you are reporting your findings about um, each of those concepts that you are focusing on. So at this stage, in this week, on this Tuesday, I think you should focus on giving structure to the case, right? Like you don't have to write the final draft of the case study because you still have time and you will go back to the field to collect more data. So you can at least do the background and this context, these 1 or 2 paragraphs, and you can structure your case. That is what you will have to do today. And finally, while you are writing this, you will have some data. Like maybe you don't have all the data because you need to do more interviews, but if you already have like an interesting quote about something that a person said, you can put it in there. Like you can start writing like 1 paragraph when someone describes a problem about the implementation of the software, for instance, or the group that is analyzing the chain, the food chain, the one that decided to use digital platforms. So I think it's a group with Hector and who else? Daniel, Eric. Uh, you can talk about and if you are going to highlight the decision process, for instance, you can talk about that the decision of using digital platforms, and you can start writing about it. And if someone told you on these interviews about how did that decision happen, you can write it in a quote. And here, when you write quotes, you can write. You don't have to write one. You don't have to report everything. Like 1 page is a whole quote. No, I think a good quote can be in between 10 words, like just 1 sentence, or maybe 5 sentences, a complete paragraph. If it's super important, that's the maximum that a quote should be, because otherwise it's too boring just to read a very long quote. So ask me any questions that you have about quotes or citing a document. Also, if you have access to documents, like maybe, I know, a report or something like that, you can triangulate information, and that is something really good. Like if you start doing this right now, like maybe uh, if you get a quote from someone saying that it was a mess, the implementation, because they didn't have a plan, and then you find a document where they are arguing that they didn't have a plan, that's perfect. Like you have 2 sources of evidence to prove your point. Or if you have 2 people who reported the same things, you can bring that into the paper. Like you can say the CEO said that it was too expensive to hire training, so they didn't hire anyone, and the CFO confirmed that because he said. And but you have to use the quotes. You have to say the CEO said, and then you write what he said in brackets, right? But you have to say, and then the next person, it will be the same, right? The CFO said that they didn't have enough money or something like that, and that's perfect. Like the CEO said it was too expensive. The CFO said they didn't have any money. That makes sense to me as a reader. I understand the issue. So um, that will be what you will have to do today. Write it on in order. Write it according to the theoretical framework. Always use the same concepts. Like this is something about style. Like if you like in the Malmi and Brown framework, if you are talking about culture, stay with culture. Like what's the culture in the what's the accounting culture of that system in the in the 2 companies, but use culture, the word culture. Like don't change it to something else. Don't change culture for, I don't know, costumes or anything like that. Don't use different words. Use the same concepts all over again, especially the ones from the framework, because the reader wants to see in the whole paper how do you use the framework. So it's very important that you keep using the same concepts. And finally, you might have this question already. I think I can talk about this in the next video, so it's not that boring or that long. Not.